My wife looked me dead in the eye and smiled as she swirled her glass of wine. "I sold that old scrap metal in the garage for $100,000, she said. Her son Brandon cheered and popped a bottle of expensive champagne they had bought with my money. They thought I was just a senile old man who would roll over and accept it. They thought they had finally stripped me of my dignity and my memories. They did not know that the 1958 Corvette was not just a car. It was a federal trap. 40 minutes later, while they were ordering lobster, the car dealer called me screaming. "Why is the bomb squad tearing apart my showroom?" I just took a sip of my water and whispered, "Because you did not buy a car, Mick. You stole government property." My name is Clifford Henderson. I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years as a chief engineer for a defense contractor designing guidance systems for missiles. I know how to calculate trajectories, and I know exactly when an explosion is about to happen. But nothing in my career prepared me for the war that was brewing in my own living room. If you are listening to this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support helps me expose the truth. Now let me tell you how my own family tried to sell my life piece by piece and how I made them pay for it. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I had been away for 3 days at a private clinic in Houston for a comprehensive heart checkup. I did not tell my wife Patricia or her son Brandon. I told them I was going fishing. In a house full of vultures, you learn to keep your weaknesses hidden. I pulled my truck into the driveway expecting silence. I wanted to rest. But as the garage door rumbled open, my heart stopped beating for a second. The space was empty. My breath caught in my throat. The concrete floor where my cherry-red 1958 Chevrolet Corvette C1 had sat for 20 years was bare. All that was left were a few old oil stains and the outline of dust where the tires used to be. I stood there frozen. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. That car was not just a vehicle. It was the last thing I worked on with my biological son before he died in Iraq. Every bolt, every layer of paint, every polish of the chrome was a memory of him. And now it was gone. I did not scream. I did not call the police immediately. I walked into the house through the side door. The air conditioning was blasting, but the house felt suffocating. I heard laughter coming from the living room. It was the kind of loud, carefree laughter you only hear from people who have never worked a hard day in their lives. I stepped into the room. Patricia was sitting on the white leather sofa holding a crystal flute of champagne. Brandon was sprawled out on the recliner, his feet up on the coffee table, wearing a watch that cost more than his entire lifetime earnings. Next to him was a girl I had never seen before, looking at her phone and chewing gum. Patricia saw me first. Her smile did not falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, Cliff," she said. "You are back early. We thought you would be gone until Friday." I stood in the center of the room. My voice was low and steady. "Where is my car, Patricia?" She took a slow sip of her drink. Brandon chuckled and looked at the girl. "See, babe, I told you he would notice." Patricia stood up and walked toward me, putting a hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a snake moving across my skin. "Cliff, listen to me, honey. We need to talk about that car. It was dangerous. You are 72 years old. Your eyesight is not what it used to be. Brandon and I were so worried that you would take it out and hurt yourself or someone else. So I made an executive decision. I sold it." The room went silent. I looked at her hand on my arm and then at her face. "You sold it," I repeated. "My car. The car I built with my son. You sold it without asking me. It is for your own good, Cliff," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "That is what families do. We look out for each other. Besides, Mick Russo at the dealership gave us a great cash offer. $100,000. Do you know how much that helps us? We can finally fix the roof and pay off some bills. It is a blessing. A blessing." She called theft a blessing. I looked over at Brandon. He was smirking. He knew exactly what that car meant to me. He hated that car because he knew he would never inherit it. I pushed Patricia's hand off my arm. That car was in my name, Patricia. You cannot sell it. Where are the titles? Where are the keys? They were in my private safe in the study. Patricia sighed as if she was dealing with a stubborn child. Oh, Cliff, do not be dramatic. We had to call a locksmith to open the safe. You have been so forgetful lately, we were afraid you lost the combination. We found the title and the spare keys. It is all legal, honey. I signed as your wife. It is community property in Texas, right? She was lying. I knew the law better than she did. But what chilled me was the calculation. They had planned this. They waited for me to leave town. They hired a locksmith to crack my safe. They had a buyer lined up. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a heist. I looked at the safe in the corner of the study through the open door. The dial had been drilled out. My private papers were scattered on the desk. They had rifled through everything. My life, my privacy, my dignity, all violated in 3 days. I turned back to them. The anger was building in my chest, a pressure that threatened to explode. But I pushed it down. I needed to know the full extent of the damage. Who has the money? I asked. Patricia looked at Brandon. Brandon sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. He tapped the pocket of his designer jeans. Do not worry about the cash, old man, Brandon said. It is safe. Mom and I are going to manage the finances from now on. You are clearly not capable of making good decisions anymore. Keeping a $100,000 asset gathering dust in a garage is stupid. We are investing it. I looked at the empty bottles of champagne on the table. I looked at the new watch on his wrist. I looked at the nervous energy in his legs. Brandon was a gambler. He had been in debt since he was 20. You gave the money to him? I asked Patricia. She shrugged. He is young, Cliff. He has business ideas. He is going to multiply it. You should be proud of him for taking initiative. I looked at Brandon's eyes. They were dilated. He was high on something, and it was not just the champagne. I realized then that the money was not in a bank account. It was likely already gone or promised to someone dangerous. Patricia clapped her hands together, breaking the tension. Come on, Cliff. Sit down. Have a glass of wine. Be happy. The garage is clean now. You do not have to worry about maintenance or insurance. We did you a favor. I looked at the three of them. My wife, who saw me as an ATM machine. My stepson, who saw me as an obstacle. And this stranger on my couch, watching the destruction of a man's life as entertainment. I did not sit down. I did not yell. I realized in that moment that the woman I married 10 years ago was gone. Or maybe she never existed. I was alone in this house. I looked at Brandon and asked one final question. Did Mick take the car to the lot? Yeah, Brandon laughed. He took it an hour ago. He said he is going to strip it down and paint it black. Said that red color was ugly anyway. Strip it down. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were going to take it apart. Good, I said. My voice was flat. I am tired. I am going to my room. Patricia looked disappointed that she did not get a fight. She wanted me to scream so she could call me crazy. She wanted me to throw a lamp so she could call the police and say I was violent. But I gave her nothing. Suit yourself, she said, turning back to her wine. We are going out for dinner later. Do not wait up. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom. My legs felt heavy. Every step was a struggle. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The silence of the house was heavy, but my mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me clean. But they made one fatal mistake. They thought the Corvette was just a classic car. They did not know about the modifications I made in 2010. They did not know about the hidden compartment under the spare tire, and they certainly did not know that by selling that car, they had just triggered a federal protocol that I had set up years ago as a failsafe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone, the one Patricia made fun of. I opened it and dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. It rang twice. "Hello," a voice answered. Gruff, professional. "Ted," I said. "It is Cliff. We have a code red on the asset." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ted spoke. "Are you sure, Cliff? Once we initiate this, there is no turning back." I looked at the photo of my son on the nightstand. I thought about Brandon's smirk. I thought about the drill hole in my safe. "I am sure," I said. "Burn them down." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. My hands were no longer shaking. I had set the gears in motion, and now I had to play the part. I had to go back out there and let them believe they had won. I had to let them think I was just a defeated old man who would grumble and eventually accept his fate. If they suspected I had called federal authorities, they might panic and run, and I needed them right here. I needed them to be sitting comfortably when the hammer came down. I walked back into the living room. The cork from the second bottle of champagne had already been popped. The girl was giggling at something on her phone, and Patricia was refilling her glass. When she saw me, she offered a tight, patronizing smile. "I thought you went to bed, Cliff," she said. "Did you decide to join the celebration after all?" I did not answer her. My eyes were drawn immediately to Brandon. He was standing by the window holding his left arm up to the light, admiring something on his wrist. It was big, bulky, and gold. I walked closer. It was a Hublot Big Bang. I knew watches. I knew that specific model cost at least $20,000 retail. "Nice watch," I said, my voice dry. Brandon jumped slightly, then grinned. He twisted his wrist so the diamonds on the bezel caught the light. "Yeah, it is nice, isn't it? Just picked it up an hour ago. You have to spend money to make money, right? It is all about the image. When I walk into a meeting, people need to know I am a player. A player." I looked at him. He was 32 years old and had never held a job for more than 6 months. He called himself an entrepreneur, but mostly he just pitched pyramid schemes to his friends. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my tone even. "You sold my car for $100,000, a car that was appraised at $150,000 last year, and the first thing you did was blow 20% of that cash on a watch." Patricia cut in sharply. "Stop it, Cliff. Do not ruin the mood. Brandon deserves something nice. He has been so stressed lately trying to help manage things around here. And Mick Russo gave us cash. Quick cash is worth more than a slow sale. You do not understand business anymore." I understood business perfectly. I understood that selling a restored '58 Corvette for $100,000 was not a sale. It was a liquidation. It was the kind of deal drug addicts make at pawn shops when they need a fix. Mick Russo must have laughed all the way to the bank. He knew he was robbing them, and they thanked him for it. I looked at Patricia. I needed to see if there was any humanity left in her, any shred of the woman I thought I loved. "That car was not just an asset, Patricia," I said softly. "You know that. It was the last project David and I worked on before he deployed. We spent 3 years restoring it, every Saturday. We rebuilt that engine with our bare hands. When he died, that car was the only thing I had left of his voice, of his laughter. You did not just sell a car. You sold my son's memory." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. The girl on the couch stopped chewing her gum. For a second, I thought Patricia might show remorse. I thought she might look down and say she was sorry. Instead, she took a sip of her champagne and looked me dead in the eye. Her face was hard like stone. "Oh, for God's sake, Cliff," she snapped. "Stop living in the past. David has been dead for 20 years. The dead do not pay the electric bill. The dead do not need to eat. We are here. We are alive, and we need to live. You care more about a pile of metal and a ghost than you do about your wife and the son who is actually here trying to take care of you. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was absolute. It was the moment the last tether snapped. She called my son a ghost. She called my grief an inconvenience. You are right, I said. My voice was barely a whisper. I have been focusing on the wrong things. Brandon laughed, breaking the tension. Exactly. Finally you get it. Cheers to the future. He reached for the bottle of champagne on the coffee table to pour himself another glass. As he leaned forward, his phone, which was sitting face up on the glass surface, lit up with a notification. I was standing right above him. The screen was bright, and the text was large. I did not mean to read it, but my eyes were trained to notice details. It was a habit from decades of engineering. You notice the crack before the bridge collapses. The message was from a contact saved only as Viper. It was short. Still short $50K. You have 24 hours before I pay a visit. Tick-tock. Brandon saw me looking. He snatched the phone up instantly, his face turning pale. He shoved it deep into his pocket and looked around nervously. Who was that? I asked. Nobody, he said too quickly. Just a buddy. Asking about a fantasy football league. I looked at the watch on his wrist. Then I looked at the fear in his eyes. The math suddenly made sense. They sold the car for $100,000. He spent $20 on the watch. He likely gave Patricia $10 or $20 to keep her happy. That left roughly $60,000. But the debt was clearly bigger. He did not sell the car to invest. He did not sell it to fix the roof. He sold it because he was in deep with loan sharks. He was drowning, and he used my life's work as a life raft. And it was not enough. I realized then that this was not just about disrespect. It was about danger. People named Viper who send countdown threats do not sue you in small claims court. They come to your house with baseball bats. By bringing this money into the house by involving Mick Russo, who was known for washing dirty money, Brandon had brought a criminal element right to my doorstep. I looked at Patricia. She was oblivious, smiling at her glass, thinking she was the queen of the castle. She had no idea her son had just put a target on our backs. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had been worried about sending them to prison. I had felt a twinge of guilt about the trap I set with the car. But now, seeing that text message, I realized I was actually saving them. Prison was the safest place for Brandon right now. If Viper got to him first, he would not survive the week. I sat down in the armchair opposite them. I crossed my legs. You know, Brandon, I said, keeping my voice conversational. That watch is beautiful. You should enjoy it. Time is a very precious thing. You never know how much of it you have left. He looked at me, suspicious of my tone. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said. Just an observation from an old man. I checked my own watch. It had been 50 minutes since I called Ted. The GPS tracker on the Corvette would have been active for 10 minutes now. Mick Russo would be working on the car, trying to strip the VIN numbers. He would be triggering the silent alarms I had installed in the chassis. The trap was primed. The bait was taken. And now we just had to wait for the snap. I looked at the door, waiting for the inevitable sound of sirens. But then I remembered that federal agents do not always use sirens. Sometimes they just arrive like a storm. Brandon poured more champagne, but his hand was shaking. He kept checking his pocket where the phone was. The celebration was dying. The fear was setting in. I sat back and closed my eyes. I thought of David. I thought of the grease on our hands. I thought of the day we finished the engine. Do not worry, son, I thought. They sold the metal, but they bought a nightmare. I stood up from the armchair, and the room went silent. The fear I had seen in Brandon's eyes when he read that text message was quickly replaced by a defensive sneer as soon as I mentioned the law. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked at both of them. "You are right, Brandon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Time is precious, and yours is running out. I am calling the sheriff. This is grand larceny. You stole my property, and you sold it to a known criminal. I do not care if you are my wife or my stepson. A crime is a crime." I reached for my phone, but Patricia did not flinch. She did not look scared. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh as if she had been expecting this tantrum from a toddler. She walked over to the sidebar cabinet where she kept the household bills and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. She tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a heavy slap that echoed in the quiet room. "Go ahead, Cliff," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "Call the sheriff. Call the FBI if you want. But before you embarrass yourself, you might want to look at that." I looked at the envelope. I did not want to touch it. I had a sinking feeling in my gut that this was the second layer of the trap they had built for me. I reached out and opened it. Inside was a single document stapled at the corner. It was a power of attorney. My eyes scanned the legal jargon. It was comprehensive. It granted Patricia full authority to manage my financial assets, sell my property, and make medical decisions on my behalf in the event that I became incapacitated or unable to manage my own affairs. And there at the bottom of the page was my signature. Clifford J. Henderson. I stared at it. The ink looked black and fresh. The date next to it was from last Tuesday, the day before I left for my medical checkup. I looked up at Patricia. "I never signed this," I said. Patricia shook her head and looked at Brandon with a sad expression. "See," she whispered to him. "I told you it was getting worse." She turned back to me and walked closer, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Cliff, honey, you signed that last week. We sat right here at this table. You said you were worried about your memory. You said you wanted to make sure I could take care of things if you got sick. Do you really not remember?" I looked at her face It was a mask of concern. She was good. She was terrifyingly good. She was rewriting history right in front of me. I looked back down at the signature. To the untrained eye, it was perfect. It had the sharp slant of my C. It had the long tail on the N. But I am an engineer. I have spent my life looking at blueprints and spotting microscopic fractures in metal. I know my own hand better than I know the back of it. I looked at the letter H in Henderson. When I sign my name, I always loop the top of the H in a counterclockwise motion. It is a muscle memory I developed in drafting school 50 years ago. But this H had a hesitation at the peak. The ink was slightly heavier at the top of the loop, as if the person holding the pen had paused for a fraction of a second to check a reference. It was a forgery. A high-quality forgery, likely traced from an old tax return or a check, but a forgery nonetheless. My blood boiled. They had not only stolen my car, they were trying to steal my identity. They were setting the stage to declare me incompetent. I opened my mouth to scream at her. I wanted to tear the paper in half and throw it in her face. I wanted to tell her that I knew exactly what she was doing. But then I stopped. If I exploded now, if I accused her of forgery without proof, she would just use my anger against me. She would tell the police I was paranoid. She would say I was violent. And with this document in her hand, she could have me committed to a psych ward before the sun came up. I had to be smarter. I had to play their game until I could flip the board. I let my shoulders slump. I let the hand holding the paper tremble slightly. I sat back down heavily in the chair and rubbed my temples as if I was confused. I do not recall this," I stammered, keeping my voice weak. "Last Tuesday." "Yes," Patricia said softly, kneeling beside me. "It was Tuesday morning, right after breakfast. You were having a good day. You said you trusted me." I closed my eyes. I felt sick. Not because I was confused, but because I was sitting next to a monster. Maybe you are right, I whispered. I have been forgetting things lately. My keys, the appointment. Brandon jumped in, eager to nail the coffin shut. Exactly. You see, that is why we sold the car. You probably forgot you told us to sell it too. You are losing it, old man. It is dangerous for you to be in charge of money. I looked up at Brandon. He looked relieved. He thought the danger was past. He thought the old lion had lost his teeth. Patricia took the paper from my hand and slid it back into the envelope. It is okay, Cliff. Do not worry. We are here to help you. That is why we need to talk about the next step. The next step. I knew what was coming before she said it. Brandon sat on the arm of the sofa, swinging his leg. Mom is right. This house is too big for you. There are stairs. You could fall. And with your memory going like this, it is not safe. We were looking at brochures for Sunny Meadows. Sunny Meadows. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the elderly on the edge of town. A place where people were sedated and left to stare at televisions until they died. It is a lovely facility, Patricia added quickly. They have round-the-clock care. You would have your own room, and Brandon and I could visit you on weekends. Visit me on weekends? I almost laughed. Once they had me in there and had control of my bank accounts, they would never visit. They would sell this house within a month. They would blow through my retirement savings in a year. Brandon would buy more watches. Patricia would buy more designer bags, and I would rot in a room that smelled like bleach and boiled cabbage. I looked at them. They were practically salivating. They were not just greedy, they were predatory. They saw my life as a carcass to be picked clean. I needed to buy time. I needed to get that document away from them or prove it was a fake. But mostly, I needed to wait for the federal agents to trace the Corvette. I rubbed my face with my hands, feigning exhaustion. I cannot think about this right now, I said. My head hurts. It is too much. Of course, honey, Patricia said soothingly. She patted my knee. You just rest. We will handle the details. We can go visit the facility tomorrow. Just to look. Tomorrow. They were moving fast. They were desperate. I stood up slowly, leaning on the table for support, as if my legs were weak. I am going to lie down, I said. I just need to sleep. Go ahead, Brandon said, waving his hand dismissively. Dream of the good old days. I walked toward the hallway. My back was to them, but my ears were straining. As soon as I was out of sight, I heard Brandon whisper. That was close. You think he bought it? Patricia whispered back, her voice sharp and cold. He is mush, Brandon. His brain is Swiss cheese. He barely put up a fight. We will get Dr. Evans to sign the competency evaluation tomorrow. Once we have that, he goes into the home and the power of attorney becomes permanent. Dr. Evans. Their family doctor. A man I knew had a gambling problem, just like Brandon. They had everyone in their pocket. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. I did not lock it this time. I did not want them to think I was hiding. I wanted them to think I was defeated. I went to the window and looked out at the driveway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty spot where my car used to be. They were planning to lock me away tomorrow. They thought they had checkmate. I pulled my flip phone out of my pocket again. I looked at the screen. No new messages. That meant the trap was still active. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the clock. It had been 90 minutes since the car left. Mick Russo was probably celebrating right now, thinking he had just made the easiest 50 grand of his life. He had no idea that the silent alarm had already logged his location. I lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling fan. You want to play the memory game, Patricia, I thought. Fine. Let us play. You think I forgot who I am. You think I forgot how to fight. But I remember everything. I remember how to build things, and I remember how to destroy them. Tomorrow you want to take me to a nursing home. But tomorrow none of us are going where you think we are going. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of the explosion. It was not going to be a bomb. It was going to be the truth. And it was going to blow this entire house of cards to the ground. The door handle turned slowly. It was the sound of a jailer checking on his prisoner. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees. Patricia stepped into the room. The harsh fluorescent hallway light silhouetted her figure before she closed the door and bathed the room in the soft yellow glow of the bedside lamp. She was holding a tray. On it sat a single steaming mug of warm milk. "I brought you something," she said, her voice dropping to that sickeningly sweet register she used when we were in public. "You looked so pale earlier, Cliff. Warm milk with a little honey and cinnamon. It will help you sleep. You need your rest, especially with the big day tomorrow." She walked over and placed the tray on the nightstand. She stood there, hovering. She was not leaving. She wanted to watch me drink it. I looked at the mug. Steam curled off the surface. It looked innocent. It looked like the kind of thing a loving wife brings to her husband after a hard day. But Patricia had not brought me a glass of water in 5 years, let alone warm milk. "Thank you," I said, keeping my face neutral. "I am not very thirsty." "Drink it," she insisted, pushing the mug slightly toward me. "Please, Cliff. Do it for me. You are so worked up. Your blood pressure must be through the roof. This will calm your nerves. It is just milk." I reached out and took the mug. The ceramic was hot against my palms. I brought it up to my face and inhaled. The smell of cinnamon and honey was strong, overpowering even. It was designed to mask something. I closed my eyes and took a deeper breath, letting the scent molecules hit the back of my throat. I spent 40 years in labs. I know the smell of accelerants. I know the smell of oxidizers, and I know the smell of sedatives. Underneath the cloying sweetness of the honey, there was a sharp metallic tang. It was faint, almost imperceptible to the average person, but it was there. Bitter almond. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my hand to remain steady. It was a heavy dose of benzodiazepines, or perhaps something worse crushed into a fine powder and dissolved in the heat. They did not just want me to sleep. They wanted me comatose. They wanted me drooling and incoherent, so that when we walked into that nursing home tomorrow, I would look exactly like the senile invalid they claimed I was. I looked up at Patricia. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold and watchful. She was waiting for the swallow. I lowered the mug. "It is too hot, Patricia," I said. "I will let it cool down for a minute." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Don't let it get cold," she said. "It tastes better warm. Drink it." I needed her to look away. I needed 10 seconds of blindness. "I think I left the window open in the bathroom," I said. "I hear a draft. Can you check it? I do not want the air conditioning to let all the cold air out." Patricia sighed an exasperated sound that revealed her true patience level. "You are hearing things again, Cliff. The windows are closed." "Please," I said, injecting a note of pathetic frailty into my voice. "Please check. I feel a draft." She rolled her eyes and turned around, marching toward the ensuite bathroom. "Fine. I will check. But then you drink that milk." As soon as she crossed the threshold of the bathroom, I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I did not go to the sink that was too far. Next to my nightstand was a large potted plant, a sansevieria. My mother used to call it a snake plant, or mother-in-law's tongue. I poured the entire contents of the mug into the soil. The white liquid pooled for a second before soaking into the dark earth. I set the empty mug back on the nightstand and wiped a residue of milk across my upper lip. Patricia walked back out of the bathroom. The window was closed, Cliff, just like I said. You are imagining things. She looked at the nightstand. She saw the empty mug. Her eyes lit up with a predatory satisfaction. You drank it fast, she said. I nodded and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I guess I was thirstier than I thought. It was good. Thank you, Patricia. She picked up the tray. Good. Now go to sleep. The medicine, the milk, will kick in soon. Do not fight it. Just let yourself drift away. She walked to the door and turned off the light, plunging me into darkness. Good night, Cliff. Good night, I whispered. I waited until I heard her footsteps fade down the hallway. I looked at the snake plant in the moonlight. I knew by morning those thick green leaves would be brown and withered. That was the level of toxicity she had just tried to feed me. My own wife had tried to poison me to steal my money. If I had any lingering doubts, any small hope that this was all a misunderstanding, it died right there in the dark. I lay down on the bed, but I did not close my eyes. I controlled my breathing, keeping it shallow and rhythmic just in case she came back to check. An hour passed. The house settled into silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, impatient footsteps. It was Brandon. He stopped right outside my door. I saw the shadow of his feet under the doorframe. He stood there listening. I made my breathing sound heavy, like the snoring of a deeply sedated man. Satisfied, he moved away, but he did not go far. He stopped in the hallway just a few feet from my door, and I heard the beep of a phone being dialed. I slipped out of bed, moving silently in my socks. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door. Yeah, Mick, it is me, Brandon said. His voice was a hushed whisper, but in the quiet house it sounded like a shout. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Yeah, it is done, Brandon continued. Mom gave him the cocktail. He downed the whole thing. He is out cold. He will not wake up until noon tomorrow at the earliest. We are going to drag him to the car and dump him at the facility before he even knows what hit him. I clenched my fists. They were not just planning to commit me, they were planning to traffic me like a piece of luggage. Yeah, I know, Brandon said, sounding annoyed. Look, the old man is handled. What about the car? Are you making progress? I held my breath. This was it. Good, Brandon said. Strip it down completely. I do not want a single part of that car traceable to the Henderson name. Paint it. Grind the VIN numbers off the chassis. Do whatever you have to do. Just get it ready for the buyer in Mexico. I need that cash, Mick. Viper is breathing down my neck. He paused again, listening. Yeah, do not worry about the title. Mom has the power of attorney. We are untouchable. Just kill the car, Mick. Make it disappear. Make it disappear. Brandon hung up the phone and walked away, whistling softly. He thought he was the smartest man in the world. He thought he had just pulled off the perfect crime. I moved away from the door and sat back on the bed. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with adrenaline. They thought I was asleep. They thought the car was being erased, but they were wrong. Mick Russo was about to start stripping the car, and the moment he touched the chassis with a grinder, he was going to disturb the silent tamper sensors I had installed. The trap was not just set. It was about to snap shut. I looked at the wilting plant next to me. I reached out and touched a leaf. It was already starting to feel soft, losing its structural integrity. I am sorry, I whispered to the plant. You had to die so the truth could live. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling. I would not sleep tonight. I would wait. I would wait for the sun to rise and for the federal agents to descend. Tomorrow was going to be a very bad day for Brandon, but for me it was going to be justice. Morning came with a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. I lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the house waking up. I heard Patricia moving around in the kitchen and the hum of the coffee machine. She came to my door once and cracked it open just an inch. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing deep and rhythmic, imitating the heavy slumber of a man under sedation. She whispered something to herself that sounded like, "Good, he is out cold," and then she closed the door. 10 minutes later, I heard the garage door open and the sound of her Mercedes backing out. She was going to the spa just like she planned, thinking she had successfully neutralized me for the day. She thought I was a problem that had been solved, a piece of furniture that had been put in storage. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I threw off the covers. I did not have much time. I dressed quickly, putting on my old work boots and a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. I did not take my truck because they might track it or notice it was gone. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the gas station on the corner and called a taxi using the payphone. I paid cash. I was ghosting through my own city. I told the driver to take me to the industrial district on the south side. That was where Mick Russo kept his dealership. Russo Motors was not a showroom for respectable families. It was a lot surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire filled with muscle cars that had questionable histories. It was the kind of place where cash was king and questions were discouraged. The taxi dropped me off a block away. I walked the rest of the distance, keeping to the shadows of the warehouses. The heat was already rising off the pavement, making the air shimmer. I could smell the dealership before I saw it, the scent of gasoline oil and Bondo. It was a smell I used to love, but today it made my stomach turn. I reached the perimeter fence and looked through the diamond-shaped holes. The lot was full of Mustangs and Camaros shining under the Texas sun. But I was not looking for them. I walked around to the side toward the service bay, where the bay doors were rolled up. And then I saw it. My heart felt like it had been squeezed by a vice. My Corvette was sitting on a hydraulic lift. But it was not the car I knew. The beautiful candy apple red paint, the color my son and I had spent weeks perfecting, was being destroyed. A mechanic in greasy coveralls was running a power sander over the hood. A cloud of red dust filled the air, settling on the concrete floor like blood. They were erasing him. They were grinding away the memory of my son layer by layer to turn it into something generic and sellable. I gripped the fence until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the gate down and beat that mechanic with my bare hands, but I forced myself to breathe. Emotions would not help me now. Evidence would. I found a gap in the fence where the chain link had been cut and bent back, likely by thieves or employees sneaking out for a smoke. I slipped through and walked across the cracked asphalt. I did not sneak. I walked straight toward the bay with the stride of a man who owns the ground he stands on. The mechanic saw me first. He turned off the sander, and the sudden silence was jarring. He tapped the shoulder of a man standing near the workbench, looking at a clipboard. The man turned around. It was Mick Russo. He was a large man with a stomach that strained against his polo shirt and eyes that were too small for his face. He looked at me, and for a second he looked surprised. Then a smirk spread across his greasy face. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice booming. "The Sleeping Beauty wakes up." I stopped 10 feet away from him. I looked at the car, then I looked at him. "Stop working on the car, Mick," I said. "It is not yours to touch." Mick laughed, a dry, hacking sound. He walked toward me, wiping his hands on a rag. "You are confused, old-timer. This is not your car anymore. I have a bill of sale signed by your lovely wife. I have the title. I have the keys. This is my property now, and honestly I am doing it a favor." That red was hideous. "We are going to paint it matte black. Make it look mean." Matte black. He was going to turn a classic into a gangster's toy. "You know that signature is forged," I said, my voice low. "You know she does not have the authority to sell this." Mick stopped right in front of me. He smelled of stale cigar smoke and arrogance. Listen to me, Grandpa. I do not care about your domestic drama. I do not care who signed what. In my world, possession is 9/10 of the law. And right now I possess the car. You are just a trespasser. He leaned in closer, his face inches from mine. In fact, why don't you turn around and walk your old ass out of here before I call the cops? I could have you arrested for harassment. Wouldn't that be funny? The police dragging you away while I finish sanding your precious toy. I stood my ground. I did not blink. I wanted him to threaten me. I wanted him to feel secure. You are making a mistake, Mick, I said. A federal mistake. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, federal mistake. I am so scared. Get out of here, Cliff. Go home and take your meds. Your wife called me this morning. She said you were having episodes. Do not make me hurt you. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I was nothing more than a nuisance. He walked back toward his office, a small glass-walled box in the corner of the garage. I did not leave. I stepped into the shadow of a tool rack and watched. Mick walked into his office, but he did not sit down. He stood by the desk, looking out the window toward the street. A moment later, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the lot. It moved slowly, like a shark patrolling a reef. It stopped right in front of the bay doors. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and thin, wearing a sleeveless shirt that revealed arms covered in intricate tattoos. A snake coiled around his neck, its head resting just below his ear. Viper. The name from Brandon's text message flashed in my mind. This was the loan shark. This was the man holding the debt. Mick walked out of the office holding a thick manila envelope. It was bulging. The man with the snake tattoo didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. Mick slapped the envelope into his palm. There it is, Mick said, his voice losing some of its bravado. 50 large. Tell Brandon we are square on the first installment. I will have the rest when the car ships to Mexico next week. The tattooed man opened the envelope and thumbed through the stack of bills. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. Tell Brandon the clock doesn't stop just because he made a payment, the man said. His voice was like gravel. Interest is still running. And tell him to stop dodging my calls, or next time I won't come for the money. I will come for a finger. Mick swallowed hard and nodded. I will tell him. Just take the money and go. The man got back into the SUV and drove off, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in the air. I stood in the shadows, my heart pounding. I had just witnessed it. The direct link. My car was not just sold, it was laundered. Mick Russo was effectively paying off a criminal debt using the proceeds of a stolen vehicle. This wasn't just civil fraud anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy involving organized crime. Mick wiped sweat from his forehead and turned back to the mechanic. All right, break time is over, he yelled. Get back to work. I want that car primed by tonight. We need to get it out of the country before the old man finds a lawyer who actually listens to him. He walked back toward his office, unaware that the old man was standing 20 feet away, having seen everything. I backed away slowly, slipping out through the gap in the fence. I had what I needed. I had the visual confirmation. I knew where the money went. I knew the timeline. They were shipping the car to Mexico next week. But they were wrong about the timeline. They didn't have a week. They didn't even have an hour. I walked back to the main road and hailed another taxi. My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from rage. It was from anticipation. I needed to get to a secure line. I needed to call Ted. The trap I had set with the GPS was about to get a whole lot deadlier. You want to play with snakes, Mick, I thought as the taxi pulled away. You just got bit. I sat in the back of the taxi and watched the chain-link fence of Russo Motors fade into the distance. My hands were steady now. The anger that had been burning a hole in my chest was replaced by the cold, hard calculation of an engineer. I had seen the crime. I had seen the money change hands. I knew exactly who the players were and what the stakes were. Now I just needed to pull the trigger. I told the driver to take me to a small diner on the outskirts of town called the Iron Skillet. It was a place where old men drank black coffee and the waitress called everyone honey. It was also the place where I met Ted every Tuesday for the past 15 years. Ted was waiting for me in the back booth. He was a man made of granite and gray flannel. 30 years in the Federal Asset Management Division had stripped him of his sense of humor, but left him with a terrifying competence. He saw me walk in, and he did not smile. He just tapped the face of his watch. "You are late, Cliff," he said as I slid into the booth opposite him. "And you look like hell." I did not waste time with pleasantries. I leaned across the table and lowered my voice. "They sold it, Ted. They sold the Corvette." Ted paused with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "Patricia." I nodded. "Patricia and her son. They forged my signature on a power of attorney. They sold the car to Mick Russo for $100,000 cash. And I just watched Russo hand $50,000 of that to a loan shark named Viper." Ted let out a long, slow breath. "Jesus, Cliff, that is a mess. But it is a civil mess. Grand larceny, sure. Fraud, yes. But the local police will take weeks to sort that out. By the time they get a warrant, that car will be in pieces or across the border." I looked Ted in the eye. "That is why I am not calling the local police. I am calling you." Ted frowned. "I cannot intervene in a domestic theft, Cliff. You know the rules. Unless it involves federal assets or national security, my hands are tied." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the original incorporation documents for a company called Henderson Defense Solutions. I slid it across the greasy table. "Read the ownership line," I said. Ted put on his reading glasses. He squinted at the document. "Sole proprietor Clifford J. Henderson. Assets include intellectual property patents and physical prototypes." He looked up at me confused. "What is this, Cliff? This company has been dormant for 10 years. I leaned in closer. "The company is dormant, Ted, but the assets are not. And the Corvette is not listed as a personal vehicle. It is listed as a physical prototype container." Ted's eyes widened slightly. He was starting to see the picture. I continued, my voice barely a whisper. "You remember the guidance system I worked on in '98? The Viper Strike Protocol. The one the military decided was too unstable to mass produce, but too dangerous to destroy." Ted nodded slowly. "I remember. You were supposed to incinerate the blueprints." "I did incinerate the blueprints," I said, "but I kept a digital backup. Just one. Encrypted. On a military-grade hard drive." "And where is that drive?" Cliff Ted asked, although I think he already knew the answer. I tapped the table with my finger. "It is in the Corvette. Under the spare tire in the trunk, there is a false bottom. Lead-lined. Welded shut. The drive is inside." Ted sat back in the booth. He looked pale. "Cliff, do you realize what you have done? You have been driving around with classified military data in a classic car for 20 years. I shook my head. It was the safest place for it. Nobody looks for a missile guidance system in a '58 Chevy, and that car never left my sight. Until today." I took a sip of water. My throat was dry. "Listen to me, Ted. Patricia did not just sell a car. She sold a container housing sensitive defense technology to a known criminal enterprise. Mick Russo is currently stripping that car down. If he cuts into that false bottom, if he tries to remove that drive without the proper biometric key, he triggers the failsafe. But more importantly, he is now in possession of stolen government secrets." Ted took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked tired, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He was not just a friend anymore. He was an agent. So let me get this straight, Ted said. Your wife forged a signature to sell a corporate asset she has no rights to. The buyer is a money launderer who is currently dismantling a vehicle containing restricted data, and the proceeds of this sale are funding a criminal loan shark. That is exactly it, I said. Ted looked at the document again. This changes everything. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is a federal crime scene. The Bureau will have a field day with this. We are talking about the Espionage Act. We are talking about trafficking in stolen defense articles. He looked up at me. Does Patricia know? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Patricia thinks she sold a piece of junk to buy her son a watch. She has no idea what she has done. She thinks she is the smart one. Ted pulled out his phone. He did not use the flip phone, he used the secure smartphone he kept in his inside pocket. I can have a team at Russo's dealership in an hour, Ted said, his thumb hovering over the screen. But Cliff, once I make this call, there is no going back. Your wife is going to prison. Your stepson is going to prison. There is no plea deal for this kind of stupidity. I looked out the window of the diner. I thought about the poison in the milk. I thought about the sneer on Brandon's face. I thought about my son David and how we built that car together to protect the things that mattered. Patricia and Brandon made their choice, I said, my voice steady. They chose greed over family. They chose to treat me like a disposable object. They wanted to erase me, Ted. They wanted to put me in a home and forget I existed. I looked back at Ted. Make the call. Ted nodded. He tapped the screen and put the phone to his ear. This is Agent Theodore Malloy, he said, his voice shifting into official command mode. I have a code red on a wandering asset. Priority 1. Location is Russo Motors. Notify the hostage rescue team and the bomb squad. We have potential tampering with a Class A device. He listened for a moment, then looked at me. And get a warrant for the residence of Clifford Henderson. Suspects are Patricia Henderson and Brandon Miller. Charges are conspiracy, fraud, and theft of government property. He hung up the phone. It is done, Cliff. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. It was heavy, but it was necessary. You should go home, Ted said. Act normal. Let them think they won. Let them dig their grave a little deeper. When we hit them, I want them to be feeling safe. It makes the takedown cleaner. I stood up and put on my cap. I will be waiting, I said. I walked out of the diner and into the blinding Texas sun. The heat hit me like a physical blow, but I did not mind. I felt cold inside, cold and focused. I hailed a taxi to take me back to the neighborhood. I would walk the last few blocks. I would sneak back into my own house. I would lie in my bed and pretend to be the senile old man they wanted me to be. But as I watched the city pass by the window, I knew that the man coming home was not the same man who left. That man was a victim. This man was the executioner. Patricia wanted a power of attorney. She wanted control. Well, she was about to find out what happens when you try to control a force of nature you do not understand. She sold my past, so I was going to cancel her future. I stood on the front porch for a full minute, composing myself. I took a deep breath of the hot Texas air and let it out slowly. This was the most important performance of my life. I had to shed the skin of the angry engineer and put back on the mask of the confused, defeated old man. I let my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed the muscles in my face until my jaw hung slightly loose. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated. Then I opened the door and shuffled inside. The living room was quiet. Patricia was sitting at the dining table with a calculator and a stack of bills. She looked up when I entered, and for a split second, I saw a flash of annoyance. She was probably disappointed that I was awake. She had hoped I would sleep straight through until the men in white coats arrived. Cliff, she said, her voice sharp. You are up. I thought you were resting. I did not look her in the eye. I looked at the floor, dragging my feet as I walked toward her. I made my hands tremble visibly. "I woke up, Patricia." I mumbled my words, slightly slurred. "My head feels heavy. Everything is fuzzy." Brandon walked in from the kitchen holding a sandwich. He stopped when he saw me chewing slowly. He looked at his mother and rolled his eyes. "Great," he said with his mouth full. "The zombie is walking." I ignored him. I pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, letting out a long, weary sigh. I looked at Patricia and let my eyes fill with tears. It was not hard. I just had to think about how much I used to trust her. "Patricia," I said, my voice cracking. "I have been thinking. While I was lying there, I was thinking about everything you said." She put down her pen and looked at me. Her expression softened, but it was not kindness. It was the look a fisherman gives when the line goes tight. "What were you thinking, Cliff?" she asked. I took a shaky breath. "You are right, about everything. I am losing it. I forgot about signing that paper last week. I forgot where I put my keys. And today I woke up and I did not even know what day it was. I am scared, Patricia. I do not want to be a burden to you." Brandon stopped chewing. He walked over and stood behind his mother. "So what are you saying?" Cliff, Patricia asked. I looked up at her, blinking slowly. "I am saying I am ready. I am ready to go to Sunny Meadows. I cannot take care of this house anymore. I cannot take care of myself. You and Brandon deserve to live your lives without babysitting an old man." The silence that followed was heavy with their relief. Patricia looked at Brandon and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one I had seen in years. It was the smile of a woman who just won the lottery. "Oh, Cliff," she said, reaching out to cover my trembling hand with hers. "That is the most sensible thing you have said in months. It is for the best. Really, you will be safe there." "Yeah, Dad." Brandon added the word "Dad," dripping with sarcasm. "It is like a resort. You are going to love the pudding." I nodded, looking down at the table. "I know. I just want peace now. But before I go, there is one thing I need to do." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Patricia tensed up immediately, her eyes darting to my hand. She thought I was pulling out a weapon or a lawyer's business card. Instead, I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was folded in thirds. I unfolded it with clumsy, shaking fingers and smoothed it out on the table. "What is this?" Patricia asked, her suspicion returning. I cleared my throat. "This is a deed of transfer," I said. I typed it up on the old typewriter in the study before I went to sleep. "If I am going into the home, I do not want the state to take my assets. I want you to have them. This document transfers full ownership of all my remaining personal property and accounts to you, effective immediately." Patricia's eyes widened. She snatched the paper from the table. Her eyes scanned the page, hungry for the words she wanted to see. She saw the words, "transfer of assets." She saw the words, "full authority." She saw the list of bank accounts I had included. But she did not read the paragraph in the middle. The paragraph written in dense legal language that I had drafted with the precision of a contract lawyer. The paragraph that stated the beneficiary accepts full legal and criminal liability for all transactions executed in the preceding 7 days, including the disposal of any corporate assets held under the grantor's name. By signing this, she wasn't just taking my money. She was formally confessing that she was the sole architect of the Corvette sale. She was shielding me from any accusation of complicity. If the feds had any doubt about who was the mastermind, this paper would clear it up. "You want to give us everything?" Brandon asked, looking over her shoulder. "Just like that?" I nodded. "I do not need money where I am going. I just want to know that you are taken care of. And in exchange, I just ask for one thing." "What is it?" Patricia asked, her eyes still glued to the list of bank accounts. "One last dinner," I said. Tonight, a real family dinner. I want to sit at this table with you and Brandon, and I want to have a nice meal. No fighting, no talk about the home. Just a goodbye dinner. And I want you to invite Mick Russo too, Mick Brandon asked. Why Mick? Because he bought the car, I said. He solved a problem for us. I want to shake his hand and thank him for taking that burden away from me. I want to leave with no hard feelings. Patricia looked up. She was glowing. The greed was radiating off her like heat. She had everything she wanted. The car money, the house, the bank accounts, and me voluntarily checking into a facility. Of course, Cliff, she said, beaming. That is a wonderful idea, a celebration of new beginnings. I will order steaks from the steakhouse, and I will call Mick. I am sure he would love to come. She pushed the paper toward me. Sign it, Cliff. Sign it, and we will have the best dinner we have ever had. I shook my head. No, Patricia. I already signed it at the bottom, see? But for it to be valid, you and Brandon need to sign as beneficiaries, and you need to sign as the assumption of liability party. It is just a formality to make sure the bank does not freeze the funds. She did not hesitate. She did not ask what assumption of liability meant. She grabbed the pen from the table. She signed her name with a flourish. Patricia Henderson. Then she handed the pen to Brandon. Sign it, honey. We are rich. Brandon laughed and scrawled his signature next to hers. There, he said, tossing the pen down. Done. You are a good man, Cliff. Finally, doing the right thing. I reached out and took the paper. I folded it carefully and put it back in my pocket right next to my heart. Thank you, I said softly. You have no idea how much this means to me. Now I can rest easy knowing everything is in its right place. Patricia stood up full of energy. I am going to call the restaurant. I am going to get the most expensive wine they have. Brandon, go call Mick. Tell him dinner is at 7. I watched them scramble. They were like children on Christmas morning. They were so blinded by the promise of easy wealth that they did not see the noose they had just put around their own necks. I stood up slowly, leaning on the table. I am going to go wash up, I said. I want to look presentable for dinner. Take your time, Cliff, Patricia called out from the kitchen, already dialing the phone. Tonight is going to be a night to remember. I walked down the hall to the bathroom. I closed the door and locked it. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The red eyes were still there, but the look of defeat was gone. I patted the pocket where the document sat. It was the final nail. Tonight, at 7 o'clock, everyone would be gathered. The thief, the forger, the fence, and the victim. But the victim was bringing the FBI to dinner. I dried my face with a towel. I felt a strange sense of calm. The acting was over. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the doorbell to ring. I went back to my room to pick out a tie. I wanted to look my best when the handcuffs came out. I chose a dark blue tie with small silver anchors on it. David had given it to me for Father's Day 20 years ago. This is for you, son, I whispered, tying the knot tight. Tonight, we clean house. The sounds of celebration drifted down the hallway from the kitchen. I could hear the clinking of wine glasses and the hum of the oven where Patricia was roasting the prime rib she had bought with my money. She was singing along to the radio, a happy tune that I had not heard her hum in years. It was amazing how quickly her mood had shifted from contempt to joy the moment she thought she had stripped me of my last penny. She was busy preparing the feast, not knowing that she was actually seasoning her own last meal. I stepped into my study and closed the door, softly clicking the lock into place. This room was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper pipe tobacco and ozone. It was the only room in the house Patricia rarely entered because she found it boring. To her, it was just a dusty storage room for my old engineering manuals and schematic drawings. She saw clutter, but I saw order. I walked over to the heavy oak desk and knelt down. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one that was always stuck, and reached all the way to the back. My hand brushed against the cold metal casing of my old laptop. It was a rugged black workstation, thick and heavy like a brick built to survive field conditions. It was outdated by modern standards, running an operating system that most people had forgotten existed, but that was exactly why it was perfect. It was invisible to the cloud. It was invisible to hackers like the ones Brandon hung out with. It was an air-gapped fortress. I placed it on the desk and plugged in the power cord. I pressed the power button and waited. The fan whirred to life with a sound like a small jet engine. The screen flickered a dull green, filling the room with a ghostly glow. There were no colorful icons or friendly wallpapers here, just a blinking cursor against a black background waiting for a command. I cracked my knuckles. It had been a few years since I had accessed the remote telemetry interface, but my fingers remembered the keystrokes. I typed in the command to wake the receiver. Initiate handshake sequence. Target asset C1. I waited. For a moment, nothing happened. The cursor just blinked, mocking me. A knot formed in my stomach. Had Mick Russo already found the transponder? Had he cut the power supply? If the battery in the car was dead, this entire plan would fail. I would be nothing more than a crazy old man with a laptop. Then a line of text scrolled across the screen. Connection established. Signal strength 90%. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The car was alive. I typed in the next command, requesting a status report. The data flooded the screen in streams of white text. Vehicle status stationary. Location Russo Motors Service Bay 3. I scanned the sensor readings. The internal gyroscope showed slight vibrations. That confirmed what I saw earlier. They were working on it. The hull integrity sensors were active, detecting the micro vibrations of the sander against the metal body. They were skinning her alive, but the heart was still beating. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 6:15. Dinner was at 7. The timing had to be precise. I turned back to the keyboard. Now came the hard part. I was not just going to track the car. I was going to weaponize it. Back in 2010, when I installed this system, I wrote a custom script. I called it the Scorched Earth Protocol. It was designed for a worst-case scenario. If the vehicle was ever taken by foreign actors, or if the classified drive in the trunk was at risk of being compromised, this protocol would bypass the local authorities entirely. It would send a distress signal directly to the private contractor server that monitored sensitive defense assets. The same server that monitored the transport of hazardous materials and prototype weaponry. I typed the command line, slowly savoring every letter. Execute lockdown mode. Authorization code, Bravo Echo 77. The screen paused. A prompt appeared asking for confirmation. Warning. This action will alert federal monitoring stations. This is a non-reversible action. Confirm. I hesitated for just a fraction of a second. I thought about Patricia in the kitchen singing. I thought about Brandon laughing at me. I thought about the years of subtle disrespect, the eye rolls, the whispers, the feeling of being invisible in my own home. They wanted me to be powerless. They wanted me to be a vegetable. I pressed the enter key. The screen flashed once. Then a new window opened. It showed a map of the city. A bright red dot was pulsing at the location of the dealership. Protocol active. Asset declared stolen. Category critical. Tamper sensors fully engaged. The laptop began to emit a low, rhythmic pinging sound. It was the sound of the beacon transmitting. I imagined what was happening inside the car right now. The doors would be deadlocking. The ignition would be completely disabled. And deep inside the trunk, under the false bottom, the drive would be emitting a high-frequency signal that only specific government scanners could pick up. But I wasn't done. I needed to make sure the cavalry arrived exactly when the dessert was being served. I navigated to the routing subnet. I patched the signal through to Ted's direct line at the agency. I attached a digital tag to the alert. Suspected espionage. Unauthorized access to classified blueprints. Immediate containment required. I hit send. The data packet flew through the encrypted tunnel. It would hit the agency's firewall, be verified by the automated system, and trigger a code red on the floor. Ted would see it on his monitor. He would see that the threat level was escalated to maximum. A progress bar appeared on my screen. Signal sent. Awaiting acknowledgement. I sat back in my chair and listened to the pinging. It was the heartbeat of my revenge. Patricia yelled from the kitchen. "Cliff, honey, are you getting dressed? The wine is breathing." I smiled. The wine was breathing, but she was about to suffocate. "I am just tying my tie, dear," I called back, my voice steady and calm. I looked back at the screen. The acknowledgement came through. A final message flashed in bold green letters. Alert received. Response team dispatched. Estimated time of arrival at target location, 45 minutes. 45 minutes. I did the math. It would take 15 minutes for the team to gear up. 10 minutes to travel to the dealership. They would secure the perimeter at Russo Motors first. They would raid the building, find the car, arrest Mick. Then Mick would squeal. He would show them the bill of sale. He would give them the address on the paperwork. And then the second team, the one Ted was leading, would come here. 45 minutes. That gave us time for appetizers. It gave us time for the main course. We would be raising our glasses for a toast right around the time the battering ram hit the front door of the dealership. I reached out and closed the laptop. The green glow vanished, leaving me in the dim light of the study. I stood up and walked over to the mirror hanging on the back of the door. I adjusted my tie. The silver anchors caught the light. I looked at my reflection. I did not see a victim. I saw a man who had just launched a missile and was now walking out to watch the fireworks. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. The smell of roast beef was stronger now. It smelled delicious. I was hungry. I was going to enjoy this meal. I was going to eat every bite. I was going to listen to their plans for the future. I was going to let them dream big. Because the wake-up call was 44 minutes away. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. It was Mick Russo. He walked in wearing the cheap suit that was too tight across the shoulders and carrying a bottle of scotch that probably cost more than his employees made in a week. He looked around my living room with the eyes of an appraiser assessing the value of the furniture and the art on the walls. When he saw me sitting at the head of the table wearing my tie with the silver anchors, he let out a loud barking laugh. "Look at him," Mick said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "All dressed up for the big send-off. You look sharp, Cliff, like a captain going down with his ship." I did not flinch. I just smiled the vacant smile of the medicated and nodded. "Thank you, Mick. It is good of you to come." Patricia ushered him to the chair on my right. Brandon was already seated on my left. The table was set with the fine china we only used for Thanksgiving. The roast beef sat in the center of the table, surrounded by roasted potatoes and glazed carrots. It was a picture-perfect family dinner, a Norman Rockwell painting. If Norman Rockwell painted criminals. We began to eat. The mood was electric. Patricia was practically vibrating with excitement, pouring wine for everyone and laughing at Mick's terrible jokes. Brandon was eating with the ravenous hunger of a man who believes he has just inherited a kingdom. So Mick, Brandon said with his mouth full, "Tell us about the car. Is it ready yet?" Mick took a long swig of his wine and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "It is getting there. My boys have been sanding it down all afternoon. That red paint was tough to get through, but we are down to the primer now. By tomorrow morning, it will be matte black. I have a buyer lined up in Mexico City." A cartel guy who loves American muscle cars but hates American license plates. He is offering me double what I paid you." Patricia gasped. "Double? You are going to make $100,000 profit just like that." Mick winked at her. "That is business, sweetheart. Buy low, sell high, and do not ask too many questions. Besides, the car had baggage. Now it is clean. No VIN numbers, no history, just a ghost machine." I cut my meat slowly. Every word Mick spoke was a confession. He was admitting to altering a vehicle to conceal its identity. He was admitting to intent to export to a foreign criminal organization. And he was admitting it all while sitting 3 feet away from the man who had set the trap. I looked at the clock on the wall. 7:30. 30 minutes since I sent the signal. The response team would be breaching the perimeter of his dealership right about now. They would be finding the car on the lift. They would be seeing the exposed chassis. And they would be tracing the ownership papers right back to this dining room table. Brandon noticed me looking at the clock. He smirked and tapped his glass with his fork, calling for attention. "A toast," he announced, standing up and swaying slightly. "To my mother, Patricia, for finally taking charge. And to Mick for being a hell of a business partner. And of course, to Cliff." He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a cruel amusement. He picked up the wine bottle and leaned over me. "To Cliff," he repeated, "for knowing when to quit. You had a good run, old man. You built some things, you made some money. But let us be honest. You are tired. You are confused. It is time for the new generation to take the wheel." He tilted the bottle. A stream of red wine splashed into my glass, filling it to the brim. But he did not stop. He kept pouring. The wine overflowed the rim, running down the stem, pooling on the white tablecloth and dripping onto my hand. "Oops," Brandon said with a mock surprise. My hand slipped. "Or maybe your glass was just too full. Kind of like your brain, right? Just spilling over." He laughed. Patricia giggled, covering her mouth with her napkin. Mick Russo chuckled, shaking his head. "Look at that mess," Mick said. "He cannot even hold a glass steady. You are making the right call, putting him in a home, Patricia. He is a liability." I looked at the red wine staining my cuff. It looked like blood. I felt the cold liquid seeping into my skin. In any other lifetime, I would have stood up and broken his nose. I would have flipped the table. But tonight, I just watched the stain spread. I picked up my napkin and slowly wiped my hand. I did not look angry. I did not look sad. I looked at the clock again. 7:44. 44 minutes. The silent alarm at the dealership had definitely been triggered. The GPS signal had led the agency to the car. By now, Ted would have confirmed the presence of the classified drive. The tactical team would be en route to the secondary location. Here, I could hear it before they could. A faint, distant thrumming sound. Not sirens. Sirens give you a warning. This was the heavy, aggressive hum of armored SUVs moving at high speed. I put my napkin down on the table. I placed my knife and fork parallel on my plate in the finished position. I took a sip of water to clear my throat. The room was still loud with their laughter. They were discussing what color to paint the master bedroom once I was gone. I cleared my throat. It was a sharp, authoritative sound. The sound of a chief engineer calling a meeting to order. The laughter died down. They looked at me, expecting me to say something confused or pathetic. I looked at Mick first, then Brandon, then Patricia. "You know," I said, my voice steady and strong, losing all traces of the slur I had faked earlier. "I always hated that red paint too, Mick. But not because it was ugly, but because it was the same color as the blood my son shed in a desert 5,000 miles from here." Mick frowned. "What are you talking about, Cliff?" "You are rambling again." I turned to Brandon. "And you, Brandon. You talk a lot about image, about being a player. But you forget that real players do not need to steal from old men to buy watches. Real players build their own empires. Brandon slammed his glass down. Okay, that is enough. Mom, get his coat. He is ruining the vibe. We are taking him to the facility tonight. I am not waiting until morning. I stood up. I did not struggle. I did not use the table for support. I stood up straight, my spine rigid, my shoulders squared. I towered over them. Sit down, Brandon, I commanded. My voice boomed off the walls. Brandon froze. He had never heard me use that tone. It was the voice of a man who used to command 300 engineers. I looked at the three of them. Their confusion was turning into fear. They sensed the shift in the air. I looked at the clock one last time. 7:45. Perfect timing. I picked up my wine glass, the one Brandon had overfilled. I swirled the liquid, staring into the dark red depths. I have one question for you, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Did you enjoy the meal? Patricia blinked. What? I smiled. A cold, terrifying smile. I asked if you enjoyed the meal, I repeated softly. I hope you did. I hope the meat was tender and the wine was sweet, because this is the last good meal you are going to eat for the next 10 years. Mick stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. What the hell is going on? Who do you think you are talking to? I am talking to a federal prisoner, I said, pointing a finger at him. And then the world exploded. The front door did not open. It disintegrated. A battering ram hit it with the force of a freight train, sending splinters of wood flying into the hallway. Before Mick could even take a breath, the room was filled with shouting. FBI, get down on the ground, federal agents' hands where I can see them. Men in full tactical gear poured into the dining room like a black flood. Rifles were raised, lasers dancing across the chests of my family. Mick Russo tried to reach for his waistband out of instinct. Do not move, an agent screamed. Mick froze, his hands shooting up into the air. His face went from red to white in a heartbeat. Brandon yelped like a kicked puppy and dove under the table. Patricia just sat there, her mouth open, the glass of wine slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. I remained standing. I did not move. I did not flinch. An agent walked up to me. He was wearing a helmet and a vest with huge yellow letters. He looked at me, then lowered his weapon slightly. Mr. Henderson, he asked. I nodded. That is me. Secure the room, the agent barked. I looked down at Brandon, who was cowering under the tablecloth, sobbing. I looked at Mick, who was being slammed against the wall and handcuffed. And I looked at Patricia, who was staring at me with a look of absolute horror as the realization of what I had done finally hit her. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. Checkmate, I whispered. The room was a kaleidoscope of flashing red and blue lights. The heavy oak front door lay in splinters in the hallway, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and aggressive authority. Men in tactical gear had swarmed the dining room, creating a perimeter around the table where my family sat, frozen in various states of terror. Brandon was still under the table, whimpering like a child. Patricia was staring at the shattered remains of her wine glass on the floor, her face a mask of shock that had stripped away years of Botox and arrogance. Mick Russo was pressed against the wall by two agents, his cheek mashed against the expensive floral wallpaper. In the midst of this controlled chaos, a sound cut through the shouting and the static of police radios. It was a ringtone. A cheerful, upbeat marimba melody that sounded obscenely happy given the circumstances. It was coming from Mick Russo's jacket pocket. One of the agents, a man with a jaw like a steel trap, reached into Mick's pocket and pulled out the phone. He looked at the screen, which was flashing the name Shop Manager. The agent looked at me. I nodded once. He swiped the screen to answer and hit the speakerphone button, holding it up to Mick's face. Mick, he said, his voice loud and clear. Answer it. Mick swallowed hard. His eyes were darting around the room looking for an exit that did not exist. Why? Yeah, he stammered. Boss, came a voice from the speaker. It was screaming. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated panic that made everyone in the room flinch. Boss, where are you? You need to get down here now. The world is ending. Calm down, Mick said, his voice shaking. What is happening? The shop, the manager yelled, and in the background I could hear the sound of breaking glass and heavy machinery. There are helicopters, Mick. Black helicopters. They landed in the lot. They blew the bay doors off. There are guys in hazmat suits swarming the Corvette. They are saying the car is radioactive or something. They are saying it is a matter of national security. Mick's face, which had been pale, turned a sickly shade of gray. What do you mean, national security? It is just a car. No, boss, the manager screamed again. They found a black box under the trunk. They are saying it is a stolen military guidance system. They are arresting everyone, Mick. They have Tony in zip ties. They are seizing the computers. They are asking for you. They say you are the ringleader of an international espionage ring. Boss, they are talking about treason. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the door that had just been kicked in. Mick stared at the phone as the agent lowered it. Then he slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a horror that went beyond the fear of jail. It was the fear of a man who realizes he has walked off a cliff he did not even know was there. You, he whispered. His voice was trembling so bad he could barely form the words. You did this. What did you do, Cliff? That is just a car. It is just an old Chevy. I took a step forward. The agents did not stop me. They knew who I was. I was the asset holder. I was the bait. It was never just a car, Mick, and I said, my voice calm and cold amidst the wreckage. I told you. It was a container. That hard drive you were trying to grind out of the chassis contains the blueprints for the Viper Strike missile defense system, or at least a very convincing digital decoy of it. By buying that car without a proper title and by attempting to dismantle it to conceal its identity, you just committed a felony under the Espionage Act of 1917. Mick's knees gave out. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. Espionage, he wheezed. I am a car dealer. I sell used Fords. Not anymore, I said. Now you are a federal person of interest. You are not going to county jail, Mick. You are going to a black site for debriefing. I hope you like windowless rooms. Mick looked at Patricia. You told me it was clean, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. You told me the old man was senile. You told me he was a vegetable. He just framed me for treason. Patricia finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched shriek of denial. I did not know, she screamed, scrambling backward in her chair. I did not know anything about missiles. I just wanted the money. He tricked me. Cliff tricked me. I turned my gaze to her. She looked small. The power she had wielded over me for the last 5 years, the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, it all evaporated under the harsh glare of the tactical lights. I did not trick you, Patricia, I said. I gave you a choice. I asked you for the keys. You lied. I asked you for the money. You spent it. I offered you a chance to have a nice dinner and leave with dignity. You chose greed. You signed the paper. I pointed to the pocket of my jacket where the liability document was safely tucked away. You signed a confession, I continued. You admitted to selling corporate assets. You admitted to the financial transaction. And since you are the one who took the money, you are the one who profited from the sale of stolen government secrets. That makes you an accomplice. Accomplice, she whispered the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. The lad agent stepped forward. Patricia Henderson, Brandon Miller, Mick Russo, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit grand larceny fraud and trafficking in stolen defense articles. The room exploded into motion again. Brandon was dragged out from under the table, kicking and screaming. "No, no, wait," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I am just a kid. I did not do anything. It was my mom. She made me do it. She wanted the money. I just wanted a watch. Please, I do not want to go to jail." I watched as the agent hauled him to his feet. The expensive Hublot watch on his wrist banged against the doorframe as they dragged him out. It shattered. A $20,000 trinket destroyed in a second, just like his future. Patricia was next. She did not fight. She went limp. As they cuffed her hands behind her back, she looked at me one last time. Her eyes were filled with tears, but I felt nothing. The well of sympathy had run dry a long time ago. "Cliff," she sobbed. "Please, I am your wife." I looked at her and shook my head slowly. "No, Patricia. My wife died a long time ago. You are just the woman who sold my son's memory for a spa day." They marched them out the front door, past the shattered wood, and into the night. The red and blue lights painted their faces in alternating shades of guilt and shame. I watched them go. I watched the neighbors gathering on their lawns, whispering and pointing. I watched the spectacle of their downfall, and I felt a weight lift off my chest that I had been carrying for years. The house was suddenly quiet. The agents were busy securing evidence, taking photos of the dinner table, bagging the wine glass Brandon had used. Ted walked in through the broken doorway. He was wearing his windbreaker with the agency seal. He looked around the room, then he looked at me. "Clean sweep, Cliff," he said. "The team at the shop secured the drive. It is intact. Mick's mechanic is singing like a canary. He confirmed Mick knew the title was bad. He confirmed the payoff to the loan shark. We have them on everything." I nodded and sat back down at the head of the table. My dinner was cold, but I picked up my fork anyway. "Thanks, Ted," I said. "I appreciate the cavalry." Ted walked over and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher. "You know," he said, taking a sip, "you could have just divorced her. It would have been cheaper." I cut a piece of the roast beef. It was perfectly cooked. "Divorce is a negotiation, Ted," I said. "This was an eviction. And besides, they needed to learn a lesson. You do not steal a man's past and expect to have a future." Ted smiled and shook his head. "You are a scary old man, Cliff. Remind me never to borrow your lawnmower." I took a bite of the beef. It tasted like victory. The lights outside continued to flash, casting long dancing shadows across the room. I was alone in the house now. The parasites were gone. The noise was gone. The fear was gone. I looked at the empty chairs where my tormentors had sat just minutes ago. They were on their way to a holding cell where the toilet was in the middle of the room and the lights never turned off. I was sitting in my dining room eating a steak. I took another sip of water and looked at the silver anchors on my tie. "We got them, David," I whispered. "We got them all." But as I sat there, I knew the story wasn't quite over. There was one more loose end. The money. The $100,000 that Mick had paid. 50 went to the loan shark. But where was the rest? And more importantly, what was going to happen when Viper realized his payment had just been seized by the federal government? The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was not a text. It was an email notification from the bank. I pulled it out. It was a transfer alert. Patricia had set up an automatic transfer. The remaining $50,000 in her account had just been moved. But not to me. And not to Brandon. It had been moved to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I frowned. Patricia was greedy, but she wasn't sophisticated enough for offshore banking. Someone else had been helping her. Someone else had been pulling the strings from the shadows. I looked at the empty chair where Brandon had sat. The boy was an idiot. But maybe the girl on the couch, the one from the first day, wasn't just a random hookup. I put down my fork. The game wasn't over. It had just entered the bonus round. The chaos in the dining room settled into a cold, terrifying procedure. The shouting had stopped, replaced by the mechanical sounds of justice being administered. The click of handcuffs ratcheting tight, the rustle of rights being read from a laminated card, the heavy boots of federal agents moving across the hardwood floor. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting calmly on the white tablecloth, watching the dismantling of the conspiracy that had festered in my home. Mick Russo was the first to be processed. 2 agents hauled him to his feet. He was sweating profusely, the cheap dye from his hair running down his forehead in dark streaks. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer arrogant, but pleading. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg or to bargain, but the agent standing in front of him cut him off. Mick Russo, you are under arrest for the possession and transport of stolen government property, violation of the Espionage Act of 1917, and tampering with a classified device. Mick's knees buckled. Wait, he stammered. I did not know. I swear I did not know. I just bought a car. I am a patriot. I love America. The agent ignored him. We also have you on tape admitting to the intent to export said device to a foreign entity. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Mick. Minimum. They dragged him out. He passed by me, and for a second, our eyes met. I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. He had gambled his entire life on a quick profit, and he had lost everything. Next was Brandon. He was still on the floor, sobbing into the carpet. An agent grabbed him by the back of his designer shirt and hoisted him up. Brandon was limp. All the swagger, all the talk about being a player and building an empire was gone. He was just a terrified boy who had played a man's game and found out the rules were lethal. Brandon Miller, the agent intoned his voice flat. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. We have the text messages, Brandon. We have the transfer records. We know about Viper. We know about the gambling debts. Brandon looked at his mother, desperation in his eyes. Mom, do something. He wailed. Tell them. Tell them it was your idea. You said we would be rich. You said he was senile. Patricia did not look at him. She was staring at the wall, her face pale and rigid. She was in shock, unable to process how her victory dinner had turned into a funeral for her freedom. They cuffed Brandon. The metal bit into his wrists right where his $20,000 watch had been just minutes ago. As they marched him out, he looked back at me. I am sorry, Cliff, he blubbered. I am sorry. I will pay you back. I swear. I did not say a word. I just watched him go. Apologies meant nothing when the handcuffs were already on. Then it was Patricia's turn. She stood up slowly, trying to regain some shred of dignity. She smoothed her dress and lifted her chin, looking at the agents with a flash of her old defiance. This is a mistake, she said, her voice trembling but loud. A huge mistake. I am going to sue every single one of you. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway. It was not Ted. It was my lawyer, Mr. Sterling, who had arrived with the tactical team. He was holding a black leather portfolio. Mrs. Henderson, he said calmly, there is no mistake. You are under arrest for grand larceny, forgery, and corporate fraud. Patricia laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. Fraud, she spat. I am his wife. We live in Texas. This is a community property state. Everything he owns, I own. I have the right to sell that car. I have the right to manage our finances. You cannot arrest a wife for selling her husband's old junk. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. Tell them, Cliff. Tell them we are married. Tell them it is marital property. Mr. Sterling opened his portfolio and pulled out a document. It was the original incorporation paper for Henderson Defense Solutions, the same one I had shown Ted at the diner. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, that is where you are wrong, the lawyer said. He held the paper up for her to see. The 1958 Chevrolet Corvette was not personal property. It was not registered to Clifford Henderson. It was the primary asset and prototype container for Henderson Defense Solutions, a private defense contracting firm. Patricia blinked, confused. What? The lawyer continued, relentless. When you forged your husband's signature and sold that vehicle, you did not sell marital property. You embezzled a corporate asset. You sold the intellectual property of a defense contractor to a third party. Since you are not a shareholder and you are not on the board of directors, that is not a domestic dispute. That is corporate espionage and theft. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But she stammered. But we are married. Marriage does not give you the right to liquidate a corporation you do not own. Mrs. Henderson, the lawyer said, closing the portfolio with a snap. And since you signed that document earlier this evening accepting full liability for all transactions in the past week, you effectively confessed to acting alone. You shielded your husband from any involvement. You took the credit, and now you take the blame. I watched the realization hit her. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. She looked at me and she finally understood. The dinner. The apology. The document I asked her to sign. It was all a trap. And she had walked right into it, driven by her own greed. You set me up, she whispered. Her voice was full of venom. You planned this. I stood up then. I walked around the table and stood in front of her. I looked down at the woman I had shared a bed with for 10 years. The woman who had tried to poison me. The woman who had planned to lock me away in a nursing home so she could spend my life's savings. I did not set you up, Patricia, I said softly. I just let you be yourself. I gave you a rope and you tied the noose. She lunged at me, her fingernails reaching for my face, but the agents were too fast. They grabbed her arms and spun her around, slamming her against the wall. The handcuffs clicked shut. I want a lawyer, she screamed as they dragged her toward the door. I want a divorce. You will get both, I said to her back. But you will be meeting your lawyer in a visiting room through a glass wall. And as for the divorce, do not worry. Mr. Sterling has the papers ready. You can sign them in your cell. She screamed wordless sounds of rage as they hauled her out into the night. The flashing lights swallowed her up. The room fell silent again. The only sound was the wind blowing through the shattered front door. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked at me. Are you all right, Cliff? I looked around the empty room. The food was still on the table. The wine was still in the glasses. But the poison was gone. I am fine, I said. Better than fine. One of the agents walked in carrying a heavy black case. It was the hard drive from the car. Mr. Henderson, he said, we secured the asset. It is undamaged. I nodded. Good. Keep it safe. It has served its purpose. I walked over to the window and watched the convoy of police cars pull away. 3 lives destroyed in under an hour. It was a tragedy in a way. But it was a tragedy they had written themselves. I was just the editor who corrected the ending. I turned back to the empty room. I was alone. Truly alone for the first time in years. But the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. It felt like peace. I sat back down at the table. I picked up my fork. There was still a piece of roast beef on my plate that I hadn't finished. I ate it slowly, savoring the flavor. The house was mine again. My life was mine again. And tomorrow I would buy a new door, a stronger door, one that would keep the wolves out for good. But for tonight, I would just sit here and enjoy the quiet. The storm was over. And I was still standing. 3 months passed before I decided to visit her. The Texas summer had turned into a mild autumn, and the leaves on the oak trees in my front yard were turning a deep shade of amber. It was a beautiful time of year, the kind of season Patricia used to love because it meant she could start wearing her expensive designer coats and leather boots. But this year, Patricia was not wearing designer clothes. She was wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit with a number stenciled on the pocket. I drove to the Federal Correctional Institution in Segoville. It was a low-security facility, but it was still a prison. The razor wire glinting in the sun was a stark reminder of the boundary between my world and hers. I went through the security checkpoint, emptying my pockets of my keys and my wallet. I felt a strange sense of detachment as the guards patted me down. I was a free man visiting a ghost. I sat in the visiting room on a metal stool bolted to the floor. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale anxiety. On the other side of the thick plexiglass partition, other families were huddled together speaking in hushed, desperate tones. I waited. When the door on the far side opened, I almost did not recognize the woman who walked in. Patricia had aged 10 years in 90 days. The blonde hair she spent thousands of dollars maintaining was gone, replaced by a dull gray that was pulled back severely into a messy bun. Her skin, which she used to slather with expensive creams every night, looked dry and papery under the harsh fluorescent lights. But it was her eyes that shocked me the most. The arrogance was gone. The calculating look, the sharpness, the fire, it had all been extinguished. All that was left was fear. She sat down opposite me and picked up the black phone receiver. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. I picked up my receiver and held it to my ear. "Cliff," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, as if she had been screaming or crying for days. "Oh God, Cliff, you came." I looked at her through the scratched glass. "I am here, Patricia." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the partition. "Please, Cliff, you have to get me out of here. You have to talk to the prosecutor. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I did not know. I cannot survive in here. The food is inedible. The women are animals. I am scared, Cliff. I am so scared." I listened to her beg. It was a performance I had seen many times before, just in a different setting. Usually she begged for jewelry or a vacation. Now she was begging for her life. "I cannot talk to the prosecutor, Patricia," I said, my voice calm. "You pleaded guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. You signed the confession. There is nothing I can do." She sobbed, loud, wet tears running down her face. "I signed it because I trusted you. You tricked me." "I did not trick you," I said. "I tested you, and you failed." She wiped her nose on her sleeve, a gesture the old Patricia would have found revolting. "What about Brandon?" she asked. "Have you heard about Brandon?" I had heard. Ted kept me updated. Brandon was in a different facility, a medium security unit. "I heard he is having a hard time," I said. Patricia's face crumbled. "A hard time," she choked out. "They are hurting him, Cliff. Viper's friends. They are in there with him. Because the government seized the money, Viper never got paid. So now they are taking the payment out of Brandon's hide. He calls me crying every night. He says he is scared to go to the showers. He says he is scared to sleep. He is just a boy, Cliff. He is not built for this." I felt a flicker of pity, but I crushed it instantly. Brandon wanted to be a tough guy. He wanted to deal with loan sharks and money launderers. He wanted to play in the deep end of the pool, but he forgot he did not know how to swim. He made his choices, I said. He wanted to be a man. Now he is learning what happens when a man makes bad deals with bad people. Patricia looked at me with disbelief. "How can you be so cruel?" she hissed. "We were your family." "Family," I repeated. "Family does not drug their husband's milk. Family does not sell their husband's memories to criminals. You ceased to be my family the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead or institutionalized than I was alive." I reached into the manila envelope I had brought with me. Patricia's eyes lit up for a second. She probably thought it was a letter of support, or maybe news about an appeal. I pulled out a thick stack of papers and slid them into the metal slot at the bottom of the window. "What is this?" she asked, looking at the document. "It is a divorce decree," I said. "Irreconcilable differences, adultery, attempted harm, fraud. It is all in there." Patricia stared at the papers. She did not touch them. "I am divorcing you, Patricia," I continued. "I am keeping the house. I am keeping my pension. I am keeping the Corvette. You get nothing. In fact, since you used marital funds to facilitate a crime, you actually owe me restitution. But I am willing to waive that if you sign these papers today and agree to never contact me again once you get out." She looked up at me, and for a moment the old anger flared in her eyes. "You are leaving me with nothing," she spat. "I gave you the best years of my life." "You gave me lies," I countered. "You gave me a performance. You pretended to love me while you waited for me to die. I gave you a comfortable life. I gave you a home. I gave your son a roof over his head. And in return, you tried to erase me." I leaned closer to the glass. "You wanted to be rich, Patricia. You wanted the quick cash. You thought selling my car was the jackpot. But you forgot the most basic rule of economics." She stared at me, breathing heavily. "What rule?" she whispered. I looked her dead in the eye. "The price of greed is always higher than the profit you make," I said. "You sold a car for $100 grand, and it cost you your freedom, your son, and your future. That is a bad trade, Patricia. That is a bankruptcy of the soul." She stared at me, stunned into silence. The truth of my words hit her harder than any judge's gavel. She looked down at the divorce papers. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen the guard had provided. She signed. She had no choice. She was defeated. I watched her sign her name. It was the last time she would use the name Henderson. When she finished, she pushed the papers back through the slot. "I hate you," she whispered. I took the papers and put them back in the envelope. "I do not hate you, Patricia," I said, standing up. "I feel nothing for you, and that is the worst punishment of all. You are not a villain in my story anymore. You are just a lesson I learned." I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I turned around and walked toward the exit. "Cliff," she screamed, her voice muffled by the thick glass. "Cliff, do not leave me here. Cliff, please." I did not look back. I heard her pounding on the glass. I heard the guards shouting at her to step back. I heard the sound of her world collapsing. I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the bright Texas sunshine. The air tasted sweet. It tasted of freedom. I walked to my truck where the divorce papers sat on the passenger seat. I started the engine. The radio was playing a country song about moving on. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I left the prison behind me. I left Patricia behind me. I left the anger and the betrayal and the hurt in the rearview mirror. I was 72 years old. I was single, and for the first time in a long time I was truly alive. The road ahead was open, and I had a lot of driving to do. The morning sun hit the driveway with a brilliance that felt like a benediction. I stood there with the garden hose in one hand and a soft sponge in the other. Water cascaded over the hood of the 1958 Corvette, washing away the dust of the federal impound lot. The car was back where it belonged. The technicians at the agency had been careful. They had removed the hard drive and resealed the chassis with the precision of surgeons. Mick had started to sand down the paint, but he had not gotten deep enough to ruin it. A good buffing and a layer of wax were all it took to bring the candy apple red back to life. I moved the sponge in slow circular motions. It was a ritual. Every stroke was a conversation with the past. I washed the fender where my son David used to lean while we talked about his future. I washed the grill that we had polished together until it shone like a mirror. For the first time in 20 years, the car did not feel like a mausoleum. It felt like a living thing. It had survived theft. It had survived betrayal. It had survived the greed of people who saw it only as a dollar sign. Just like me, it had some scratches underneath, but the engine was still strong. I dried the car with a chamois leather cloth, taking my time. The house behind me was silent. No loud television. No arguments about money. No fake laughter. The silence was not empty, it was full of possibility. I had sold the furniture Patricia bought. I had repainted the walls she chose. I had purged the space of her presence. Now it was just me and the memories I chose to keep. I went inside and changed into a fresh shirt. I grabbed the keys from the hook. They felt heavy and cool in my palm. I walked back out and opened the driver's side door. The smell of old leather and gasoline hit me. It was the best perfume in the world. I slid into the seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. It was a deep, guttural growl that shook the pavement. It was the sound of defiance. I backed out of the driveway and headed toward the city. I was not going to a car show. I was not going to show off. I had an appointment. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to the curb in front of the community college library. A young man was standing there waiting. He was wearing a faded backpack and holding a stack of engineering textbooks. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright with intelligence. This was Leo. He was the first recipient of the David Henderson Memorial Scholarship. He was a kid from the wrong side of the tracks who worked 2 jobs to support his mother while studying mechanical engineering. He reminded me so much of myself at that age. And in a way, he reminded me of David. I honked the horn. Leo looked up and his jaw dropped when he saw the car. "Mr. Henderson," he asked, walking over tentatively. "Is that the car?" "That is the one, son," I said, leaning over to open the passenger door. "Hop in. We are going to be late for lunch." Leo climbed in, treating the car with a reverence that Brandon never showed. He ran his hand gently over the dashboard. "It is beautiful," he whispered. "I cannot believe you got it back." I smiled, shifting into gear. Some things are worth fighting for, Leo. Never let anyone take what you have built. Not your ideas, not your dignity, and certainly not your car. We drove down the highway, the wind rushing through the open windows. I looked over at Leo. He was talking about his classes, about a design project he was working on. He spoke with passion. He spoke with respect. I realized then that family is not just about blood. Blood had tried to poison me. Blood had tried to sell me out. Family is about shared values. It is about the people who respect your legacy and want to carry it forward. Brandon wanted my money to buy watches. Leo needed my help to build a future. I knew where my investment belonged. I accelerated, feeling the power of the V8 engine beneath us. The road stretched out ahead of us, endless and open. I was not an old man waiting to die. I was a mentor. I was a survivor. I was a driver. I thought about Patricia sitting in her cell, staring at a concrete wall. I thought about Brandon looking over his shoulder in the prison yard. They had underestimated me. They looked at my gray hair and saw weakness. They looked at my silence and saw submission. They forgot that the men of my generation were not built from plastic and shortcuts. We were forged in an era where you fixed what was broken and you protected what was yours. We do not start wars, I thought as I gripped the steering wheel. We are patient. We are quiet. We give people chances. But when you cross the line, when you threaten our homes and our honor, we do not just fight back. We end it. I looked at Leo and turned up the radio. "So tell me about this engine design of yours," I said. Leo smiled and started talking. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly listening. The nightmare was over. The dream was just beginning. "This is Clifford Henderson signing off. The most dangerous mistake a person can make is to mistake kindness for weakness and silence for ignorance. Patricia and Brandon believed that because Cliff was old and generous, he was also foolish and defenseless. They let their greed blind them to the fact that the man they were stealing from was the same man who had built the fortune they coveted. In the end, they learned a harsh truth. The person who builds the castle knows exactly where the trapdoors are. Never underestimate the people who provide for you because they have the power to take it all away. So what do you think? Was I too harsh on my wife, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Would you have forgiven her, or would you have called the FBI, just like I did? I want to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and survival. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. See you in the next video.